Hello everyone and welcome back to another tutorial video. In today's tutorial we're going to be looking at part 2 of our super muscular anime man tutorial. So we will be drawing the same character as last time, but this time we'll be looking at him from behind so we can kind of see the back muscles and all of that going on. So like always, we'll start with our little head shape on a super low opacity layer for our construction lines. These are going to be going through so much edits and changes, so we want to make sure it's nice and light. If you're doing this traditionally, again, just make sure you draw super lightly so that way all of your corrections and changes don't show through in your finished piece. I'm going to now use a ruler to establish our center line so we can balance our character off of it. And hopefully I don't run out of space here. I might have to take my guy in the middle and just kind of reposition him as we go just to make sure I have enough space. So what we will do is we'll start by putting in our jaw, just a simple jaw shape, and this will help us get our proportions right. So we'll do that, and I'm trying to keep this character roughly the same height as my previous one, but I'll still walk you through how to do it from scratch, that way you don't need a character beside him to balance off of. But for right now, we'll draw in our shoulder line. And we want the shoulder line roughly a jaw length beneath our chin. So we'll put it right there. And just like what I explained in the previous one, give him a really wide rib cage to work off of, like this, because we want to have a large enough frame to build all of our muscles on. Otherwise, we're just going to run out of room and everything's going to look compressed and weird. Then super generous shoulder circles right off to the side. They can pretty much be the same size as the head circle that we did. So just nice and generous off there. And then what we'll do is roughly one head height between our ribs is where we'll drop in our hip line. And we want the hips of our male characters to roughly be the same width as the widest point of our ribs, because they don't have super wide hips. So we want to make sure we don't get our hips too wide, then they start looking feminine. So we'll do this. Then we can connect with a slightly hourglass shape like so. Try to get this somewhat symmetrical here, and I'll bring the hips out because we're gonna barely see the hips poking out. Nothing crazy though, like so. And this little portion here where they kind of meet is gonna basically be right in the middle between the hips and our ribs. Okay, so we'll do that. From there, we can go ahead and draw in our legs. And again, I'm going to have his legs kind of off to the sides here because we need to have enough room to construct all the muscles. If they're just right up next to each other, everything's going to get too squished together and it's going to look strange. So we'll open the legs up and then establish where your floor is going to be. I like to just roughly around the height of a jaw, use that for my ankles. So we'll put in a very simple foot shape, nothing crazy, it's not a foot tutorial. We just want a placeholder so it looks like he's actually standing, like so. From there, at roughly the halfway point of everything, draw in some generous oval shapes for our knee joint, just like that. So I think just like what we've been doing for the last ones, we'll just start with the legs first. So this time we can start with the glutes. So following our center line, just barely have a convex line outside of the shoulder line, or outside of the center line here, but very slight, because the more muscular and lower body fat our male characters get, the more the sort of box of the glutes looks like. Okay, they're not super rounded muscles. They look rounded if you have enough fat, but without so much fat they start to look a little bit more boxy and angular. Then for the lower back, super slight concave line, very slight, just to show that the back actually has some curve in it so it can actually bear weight. Then we'll have some lower back muscles right there. We'll bring our glute line down a little bit. It kind of got in the way there. So we'll do that. Add some little dimples here for where the muscles are kind of cinching up. And then we can go ahead and draw the legs. So he is so jacked that we're going to bring the center line down further into where the hamstrings are. Okay, and then split them out. From there, we'll have our outer quad visible, keeping it a little bit angular. And again, the thickest point of the hamstring is up in here, but then the thickest point of the quad is down here, okay? So we're not going to see the quad muscle that runs pretty much right on top of the leg. So instead, we're just going to see like this. And I will shrink this down just a little bit. Like so, kind of using a shape like that. And trying to keep it a little bit angular looking. The hamstrings aren't as angular as the quads though. And then we can add in some of these straps because the hamstrings, there's a couple different ones. And so we're just kind of defining them here with sort of these V shapes. So now we've got some definition there. Then we can draw in our socket for the knee. From there, we'll give some relatively wide tendon areas here. Like so, because we're going to make some pretty wide calf muscles. And again, the outer calf here is going to be a little bit larger of a bump than the inside calf because the shorter head is on the inside here. And just like in our previous tutorial, we're going to add some sort of sharp, almost flat angles to these calves because they're really resting on top of a rounded muscle belly that is right underneath of them. And so these are almost flat looking muscle heads on top of that rounded portion there. So we want his calves to be a little bit angled. They're not going to look super round because he doesn't have a whole lot of body fat. So we'll do the same thing over here. Again, have a more exaggerated calf bump on this outside head than on the inside one. And then add some definition for this, for the inner calf muscle. Poke in our ankles, making sure I'm getting the ankle height right here. Just like that. Okay, and then from there, we can go ahead and put in our arms. So, just like last time, I'll kind of push them out to the sides here so they're out of the way. Like so. This one's kind of at a weird angle though. There we go. Okay, so, and like I mentioned before, typically when we're drawing our characters, we're using like the ribs and stuff to help situate where our elbow socket is. But because this character is so jacked and we have to exaggerate certain parts of them, it's going to be a little too hard to really just nail that in relation to the ribs. So instead, we're just going to go completely off of like feel and what looks right for the overall length of the bicep in relation to the forearm. So I'm going to roughly pick this halfway point. You generally want the wrist to be kind of around the base of our hips here. So that's kind of where I'd put in the wrist joint. And then I'm using that overall length to determine where my elbow joint will be. So from there, we can go ahead and we'll start with the shoulder. Again, getting super generous here with the size because the shoulder muscle can actually get quite large. So we'll do that and basically just connect it to the top of the ribs here. Okay, from there, we'll quick put in our neck, keeping the neck super wide, pretty much right even with the area of the jaw that hooks into the chin. And now this is where it'll get interesting. So we're going to start defining and drawing in some muscles here. So the traps are so big that they're going to ride way up here, and we're going to see this little portion here where the traps don't connect. They kind of swoop in and meet like this. So we're going to add some lines here for the definition, as well as some little lines here, because the traps kind of run up on top like so. Then we can add in some lines there for our shoulder blades. And what I would definitely recommend you do is look up references for the back. Genetics plays a huge role in what the back is going to look like, because again, some people have very long muscle bellies, some people have very short ones, some people have very peaked ones, some people don't. So it's like the back is going to look different depending on your genetics. And so you definitely want to look up a reference, because you want to try to get this looking like a back. But it can look a little bit different from everyone else's, and that's fine. So from there, what we'll do next is just really elongating where our lats come in, like so. And they can come up to the base of our shoulder line, okay? Like this. Kind of bring this one in a little bit, because our shoulders are still big enough that there's a lot of muscle pushing them away from the lats, like so. But then what we want to do from there is add in our rear delt definition, okay? So this will be more visible in the line art, so just bear with me till then. But the lat is basically meeting right up to that rear delt. And so sometimes if somebody has a very developed back, but they haven't developed their rear delts, then it almost looks like the back just is the rear delt, but it's not. And on this character, we'll have some defined rear delts. So we'll look at those more when we can, but for now, just bear with me. From there, give a really exaggerated inside tricep head, and then on the outside, keeping it nice and angled, we'll have the shorter head visible, and these just connect right up into the shoulder like so. Then we can have them connect here to a relatively wide elbow joint, and like always, we'll have a less exaggerated bump here for the inside of the forearm, with a much larger one on the outside, since that's a more major head of the forearm. So we'll do that. From there, then we'll draw in our hand like so, and then we'll do the same over here, keeping it kind of angular. We don't want it to be too sharp looking, but we definitely want him to have some angle to these so it looks a little more rigid. So it expresses a little bit more of a masculine feature to our character. So even if you're drawing like a muscle girl, you'd want to use some more sharpness because she's at low body fat, but you still don't want to go overboard with the overall angle, because then they start looking like a man and not just like a exaggeratedly jacked lady. So we'll do this simple hand, except this one's like curved in for some reason and a little too big. There we go. Alright, then from here we can go ahead and define our lats a little bit better, like so. Just kind of following up at their base into the more center portion of our back. Adding a nice line right there. And then again, you can look up some reference photos and you can see kind of some definition in the back there. We're not going to go overboard with those for right now, because this guy's not necessarily flexing his back out. He's just kind of standing there. So we'll just focus more so on getting the lats nice and wide and getting the upper back defined. So we'll do that. And there we go. So now I will just real quick do the line art here. So like with all of my little tutorial videos for figures, I'm not super concerned about the quality of my line art. I'm just trying to get it to look somewhat symmetrical here, and get through it so I don't take up too much of your guys' time. So I'm doing this, drawing some of the definition lines here, our shoulder blades. I can even add in a little marks here to show the middle portion where kind of some of the muscle is running either side of. This side of the neck is a little bit shallow, so do that. From here, I'll just bring the lats down, trying to get them somewhat even, like so. And then we can draw in the rear delt like this. And I kind of like to have kind of a similar shape to the tricep there at the very edge of it, where it kind of looks like it's swooping out and connecting. You could keep it a little bit more rounded, like you could do something like that as well, and that's fine too, but I like giving it a little bit of angular shape there, so it looks like it's stretching out over. It kind of makes it look a little bit more sharp, a little more rigid, so I'll do that. And then our tricep, which is gonna ride into the shoulder here, elbow into the forearm, super simple hand that we don't care about today. Then we'll draw the stomach into the hips. Try not to give him too much of an hourglass figure here, but then a little bit of the hips poking out, but nothing crazy here. Something like that. And then for the lower back, instead of just making it a shape like this, I'm actually going to have the top portion almost curling over the lower. So it just shows it's like the muscle's so thick that when he's just standing there, the upper portion of it is kind of resting on top of the lower sort of strap here. Then add a slightly concave line like so, along with that little X there, so it's kind of going to look like an X. So we'll do that. From there, you can draw in the glute line, and keeping this pair of glutes super sharp compared to our other male tutorials, like so. Then we can come in and draw the legs, so keeping the hamstrings super thick right up at the top, and then the quad kind of at the thickest above the knee, something like that. I guess this one needs to be a little bit bigger. Then we can add some definition of the hamstrings like so, add in our little knee socket, add in the tendon areas, so just some concave lines like so. And then from there we can add in the calf, nice and generous, really pushing the angles on this compared to our previous tutorials, because this guy's got so much muscle mass that it's really gonna exaggerate the flat shape of the outside faces of the calf muscle. And then again, this is the little tube there that runs underneath of him, so we'll even put that in because he's got that developed. And we'll do this for the feet, just super simple. Don't care about them right now. Then we'll do the same over here, like so. And then we'll see the kneecaps just barely from the front, just kind of use like a pointed shape. Don't over exaggerate it though, they're just going to be peeking out. Draw in the rest of this leg here, giving it some definition. Put in our foot. Okay, and then looks like we need to finish this arm over here. So I'll start with the shoulder, bring it down, inside tricep, head, like so. Connect it into our elbow. Keep this inside forearm a little more shallow than the outer, like this. And yeah, there we go. So I can already see I need to bring this hand down a little bit. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to quick take a step back so I can make any corrections that need to be made, rebalance anything. I'll let you know what, if anything, I change, and then we'll just go over the final review. So see you in a bit. Alright, so I just had a couple of symmetry issues to fix. It was nothing major. Just kind of fix up the kneecaps, brought this hand down a little bit. His head was a little bit lopsided, so I just kind of fixed that up, but I didn't have to change any of the anatomy or anything, just had to make it more symmetrical. So pretty much this is what we want. Remember, just like last time, make sure you give yourself a very wide frame to work off of, so make sure your ribs are way wider than the head. Keep your hips, you know, kind of in line with your ribs is kind of a good way to look at it. That way you still have that overall X frame, which is basically the width of the shoulders in relation to the hips in relation to the peak of the quads. Okay, so you kind of want it to look like an X. Alright, so if you keep the rib cage nice and wide and then match the hips to it, you'll still be able to achieve that X frame because you'll give yourself enough room to put all the muscles. If you make your character too condensed, too small, then when you're trying to put on all these huge muscles, there's just not going to be enough room for them, and then it's just going to start looking strange, right? And by doing this, we can still give our character a regular head height, so it's not like our character is a giant. It's just his the width of him has enough room to put on a bunch of muscles that you could put him up next to a regular proportion character, and you don't need to like shrink that character's head to make him, you know, shorter or whatever, because our character's got the same head heights as a regular one. It's just you got a much wider frame, so we can still give him muscles without making him look like a giant. Okay, really push the width of the back. If you don't get the back nice and wide, then your character might look like he's got muscles, but he doesn't look like he's jacked. You need to make sure the back is nice and wide. Make sure the shoulders are nice and rounded, have a little bit of angle to them, but they really are one of the more rounded muscle groups in a man's anatomy. Keep the glutes a little bit angled, kind of like a square shape with some slight curves at the very edges of them. They're not quite shaped the same as a lady's glutes. There's a lot less fat that's held down here too, so they're just not going to be very round. They're going to be a little bit more angular, a little bit flatter. Same for the calves. The outside muscles here are a little more flattened, and they kind of just get pushed out into a circular shape by the tube here that runs underneath of them. And since he doesn't have a whole lot of body fat, you can really pronounce the sharpness of the calf muscles and the width of them. You know, just give them a little bit of angle, a little bit of flatness to them. And yeah, and then I guess really for our super jacked characters, just remember the thickest part of the hamstrings is up here, and the thickest part of the quad is right here. So you need to make sure they can get a really thick base up here at the top for the hamstrings, and then a really thick base, or really thick quad just above the knee. Okay, and that gets more and more exaggerated the more muscle mass that your character has. But for right now, that pretty much does it. Oh yeah, I guess the last thing is we'll have the back kind of swallowing the shoulders here. So the last thing is, when it comes to the rear delt, you can use like this little horseshoe shape. You can do just a regular sort of rounded shape. You know, sky's the limit there. Look at lots and lots of references. It can kind of connect in different ways depending on how big the back is. It's not necessarily that muscle changes person to person. It's just depending on how developed it is in relation to your lats is going to kind of change the overall look of it on our jacked characters, okay? So kind of mess around with it so it looks right, but you can kind of do what you need to there. So either way, that'll just about do it for this one. So in the next tutorial, we'll look at the same character but from the side, so you can kind of see the overall thickness of our character from the side and kind of how the muscle groups are going to look different from some of our more regular built characters. So hopefully you found this one helpful, and I will see you in the next one.